And we're back. And this video is mostly me doing one fucking mission, one investigation mission, and a bunch of little tiny missions.
The secret world. There's no. Oh, third age.
Waiting suits you well, Nefertari. So cool in the shade of your crown. There will always be need for each of our aspects. In time, even you might appreciate this as an honor, not a prison.
Yeah, how much
And
time
only for who?
exactly?
The Egypt we knew is long gone. So, our civilization was not the first nor the last in this land.
I think there's a statute of limitations, and that is at least, at most, it's 1,000
Why
years.
Arten chose to manifest itself in this place. Akhenaten had many grand temples and solar lodges built for it in Amarna. Yet the voices called him into the howling desert. Why is that?
Because the sand is thin.
And what lies beneath can easily spread its influence. Entice men here and leave their bones bleaching in primeval caves.
That's how the Artemis seized power so quickly. They took up the arms that had been left behind. Hold on. You knew this all along?
Well, you didn't ask.
What? Is this because I pushed her off the bark when we were children?
Oh no. Don't drag me into this.
And that's how you know they were rich in life.
Well, they've already mentioned their father was like head priest or something.
And yeah, and that's not always that's not always nobility in ancient Egypt, but often it effectively is. But like,
well,
rich
even
people
if it isn't, that is a rich and powerful position.
I mean, yeah, and being like they used. What I'm saying is, they used powerful ancient Egyptians would go on pleasure cruises on the Nile in their barges. They basically go yachting, like rich people do today. And as far as outdoor activities, it was that and hunting, which also rich people do today, but poor people do it today too. It was way more dangerous then because they didn't have anywhere near the kind of weaponry they have now. So, for the most part, like peasants didn't hunt unless they were very lucky and there was an herbivore that wasn't a hippo nearby.
So you might be wondering what I'm doing. I'm searching for the artifact. I am missing the very special, I think it's the tab key that highlights interactable objects. That doesn't work in this game, but it works in other games. So
yeah, you've been playing a lot of Diablo clones, huh?
No, I was playing Lord of the Rings Online.
Oh, yeah, because that is from back in the day. I remember playing Fate a lot, and Fate is Diablo with a family-friendly exterior. And it works the exact same way. You press tab, and it shows everything on the ground, all the trash that you need to pick up.
Yes, here I've accidentally hit tab because I was looking for this tiny little thing.
Go pixel hunting.
Oh, it gets better.
Oh, good.
So we're given a map. I hope you like looking at that map, because it's not marked on your mini-map. You have to go and look at the image again. It's held in your journal. When I find the map. So those 3 X's are where we will find what we're looking for.
Oh.
So the first excavation site is marked, near the bones of this enormous thing.
Additional assignment received. Initializing.
Who knows?
And here is one of the worst parts of this investigation mission. So, you follow it.
Does it get attacked, or do you just have to stalk it?
You just have to follow it, and it will point somewhere, and then you go to that place.
That's very slow.
Yeah, it's quite slow.
Yeah, and it's just a shrunken down Agartha custodian too. It's nothing.
Yes.
There's nothing that interesting about the model even. You just, God, stellar gameplay. 10 out of 10 is
You have to do this
9.75 in
twice
GameSpot
more. You have to
in
do this twice
Game
more.
Informer.
I think. Oh god. I don't actually remember if it's twice more or 3 times more.
Oh, man. You know, it makes me sad. Not this. I mean, this makes me sad, but just normally for the last couple of recordings, I've had these Seagram's escapes that are way better than they should be, and I bought several. I bought like 3, and one for the night I got it, one for the session we had last night before this. It's a good first session for a tabletop game, and then one for today. And as I was putting the bottles away, my hand slipped, and one of them fell and shattered. And I reached out to catch it before it shattered, and it splashed up, and a piece of glass sliced open my left middle finger. And I bled
Ow.
all over my kitchen, and it was real bad. I didn't end up needing stitches, but my kitchen has smelled for days like a mixture of Seagram's escapes, wild berry, and blood. And it has taken so much scrubbing to get that out. So now I'm just sort of mourning what could have been.
Yeah, you'll notice it's not on the other 3 aren't on the map. You have to go back into your journal and look at the map again. But I take this opportunity to do a bunch of the little side quests. So most of this video is me doing side quests while I do this in this quest.
Yeah, it's gonna be another it's gonna be another thrilling video of
Me bubbling.
well, I was gonna say side quests, but you know,
But I do like that these quests where you get this prehistory sense, these third ages and
yeah,
the ages and how we don't really know anything about them. We don't even know how it works. Like, does time rewind itself? Are we just
they do kind of cover this actually. I don't.
Oh, they do.
It's like not in too much detail, but okay. I'm not sure how much of this is spoilers, but I'm not sure how much we care. So you've probably seen people talk about Gaia, and you've probably seen mentions probably in the LP so far of Gaia engines. They're the engines of reality, and they maintain it above the filth. And if reality is damaged badly enough, they pull a factory reset. Bits and pieces of previous ages survive, but they basically rewind time. And the stuff that's left over is just like buried. Basically it gets turned into prehistory.
So you can think of these as those out of place artifacts conspiracy theorists talk about.
That's exactly the idea. Basically,
Okay.
the Gaia engines screw with time and leave out of place artifacts behind as they do so. And that's not good for reality, especially since they've had to do it 3 times, and possibly a 4th coming up, and nobody knows if they can pull it off again. But
yeah, there are a lot of follow the slow thing as it meanders quests. Like, watch this. It literally circles this rock 3 times.
God.
Just to fuck with the player.
And the stuff we see of prior ages is fascinating, and we barely see, and we never see any details, because that would spoil the mystery. That would spoil the fun. It's tragic. We do meet people who were there, though. I don't think, I know there's a couple characters in Romania. There's at least one character in Romania who is a citizen of a civilization during the Third Age, and she's still alive. I think there are like a couple others that are hanging around, and there are villains who have survived multiple resets, but that's spoilers.
Yeah, for a second there, I thought you were talking about the villain.
No, they're even older.
Yeah, I mean they're way older, and we'll see that when we meet them at the end of Romania.
Yeah.
But yeah, you'll know them. You'll know the name.
You will know
At
several.
least I hope. I hope you'll know the name.
Odds are very.
They're quite infamous.
Yeah, odds are good. If you've been playing video games, then you probably learned the name at some point. It's the sort of name that you pick up when you play video games, or you get into obscure, religious lore.
Or play vampire.
I mean, that's fair. Maybe not just video games, games in general.
Yeah, if you've played Vampire the Masquerade, you'll know who it is.
Mm-hmm. Vampire the Masquerade. God, that is just. I remember I reviewed their Chicago book once, and it was just. It was
bad.
better than it was better than it could have been, but that doesn't mean it was good. By the way, they did include. Okay, so do you know who the first settler on the first non-Native American to live in the area of Chicago? His name.
It was some French fur trapper, wasn't it?
Man named Pont du Sabot. He was a Haitian freedman. I think he actually may have escaped slavery, and he made his way up and founded a trading post, and that was at within Chicago's modern city limits, and that's people started gathering in the area around that post, and that's basically the nexus of what would eventually become Chicago. So, and it doesn't have his name, but a guy who is a black Frenchman who came to the area in that time period and founded Chicago shows up as a character in Vampire the Masquerade. He's there, present in city politics. And of course they also have a lot of Lopan is, as in, Big Trouble in Little China. Lopan is also in there, and complete with the triad that he runs in the movie. It's a very 90s book.
Yeah, that's I say yeah, that's mainly because of how they treat Chinese vampires in Masquerade.
God.
That is like a whole kettle of fish.
Oh man, God, the way that they White Wolf, old White Wolf especially, was just to some extent kudos on them for attempting to have representation at all, and sometimes they did try to portray them positively, but
I think we've talked about the two most infamous things, the Gypsy book and the Holocaust book.
Yeah. And of course there's Infernals, if you're willing to branch out into Exalted.
Oh god, I don't want to think about Infernals. I've only seen that page of Infernals, okay? That's all I've seen of it, and that's all I want to think about.
God. Yeah. There were issues. I actually had a chance to talk.
Not with the Holocaust. Oddly, not with the Holocaust.
Yeah, the Holocaust.
It has a foreword from a rabbi who's like, "This is the weirdest shit I've ever seen, but it's not offensive."
Yeah, that by all accounts, the Holocaust book is actually well written, genuinely respectful. It's just so weird that they decided. It's such a terrible idea that even executed well, it's like.
Well, it's more that if you make a game about being dead and in the afterlife, what's the one thing they're going to ask about?
Well,
They're going to ask that question, what happened to the people in the Holocaust? If you make a game where the nature of your death and suffering impacts your character, they have to talk about that.
yeah, but they don't.
Otherwise, they're just the question everyone's going to ask at every convention is, well, wait, what does that mean for the Holocaust?
Yeah,
They were like, fuck it, put out the Holocaust book.
yeah. And then they came out with Geist, which is fun and is completely broken for New World of Darkness. And I love
World of
Geist.
Darkness. I don't even play World of Darkness because everything I see is vampire, and I dislike vampire on a fundamental level.
Yeah, Vampire of all the different lines and all the different waves of World of Darkness, Vampire is the one I like the least, and the Werewolf is the one I have the least interest in. Both variations. But I really like Changeling Lost. I love Changeling. It's just
Changeling is very interesting. Werewolf never appealed to me because while the concept of eco-terrorists for Gaia is cool, they did that whole alpha pack thing, and it's like, no, this is not fun role playing.
yeah. They basically worked a lot of almost every single what are they called? Not breed, but tribe or whatever was some different ethnic stereotype. And
oh yes, and then they put out the Africa book.
but like it the more in general, the more obscure and more disliked a World of Darkness line was, unless it's Beast, which is rightfully hated, the more I like it. Like, I like Geist, and people hate Geist because it's unbalanced. I really like Mummy, and people hate Mummy because it's weird and doesn't play well with other books. Except for Changeling, which I love.
Beast was the serial killer one, right?
No, that's Slashers, which I also like. And Slashers, the thing I love about Slashers is that, on a very simple level, the most dangerous creature in the World of Darkness is a serial killer. Because basically, the way that they work is mechanically, you place restrictions on how you can attack, and every restriction gives you some dice. So if you, I've seen people build slasher characters that, just by taking a bunch of very simple limitations, like restrictions that are in the book, they have just a dude with a knife who rolls like 30 dice for every attack, and which is enough to pulverize almost anything.
God, now I want to GM a game of Vampire where they like their first mission is to go up against a slasher.
Yeah, slashers are fun. I think it's another one where it's kind of the mechanics are kind of weird, but that's basically New World of Darkness, as opposed to World of Darkness, where the mechanics are broken and racist. But like it is, slasher is fun.
Okay, so I'm gonna tell what I'm doing here. I am looking for the written down code to unlock that box. What I don't know is that box has a laptop on it that is a separate object. So I can access the laptop and the hint is there. But I don't know that because it's all one highlightable object.
Yeah,
so I'm going to look it up and find it out, and it turns out it's a reference to a Marx Brothers movie.
Which I would not have expected in this game. I don't have a problem with it, but it's just, different genres. Like seeing somebody ask for swordfish in the middle of a horror game. Yeah, God. I really like Changeling the Lost. I will never stop. It is about the nature of trauma. It is one of the best, basically, everything in it is symbolic of dealing with the nature of trauma in various ways on a mechanical level. And games like that, like I really like Pendragon. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
So the password is swordfish,
Is it swordfish?
but it is swordfish, but that's because that's from a Marx Brothers movie.
Yeah. So it is. I was making the password is swordfish because that's the obvious Marx Brothers movie joke. But no, I was right on the money just because that's it was that obvious. You know, I vaguely remember this quest actually. I remember taking this quest specifically because the quest title was the Third Age and being really disappointed. Because all you do is just like you find some stuff and get a little bit of backstory, and you don't see much about the Third Age.
Yeah, it kind of sucks. Like the other investigation missions have done stuff. They've showed us stuff. This one kind of doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I get the feeling it was very much a, well, we need another investigation mission for this area.
Yeah. This is, I mean, I gotta give kudos to the Secret World. In almost any other MMO, a mission that would be padding would be going and killing 20 bears. And in here, it's doing investigations and doing digging and doing research. So, at least it was creative, even at its most, like, even at its grindingest. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm playing, like I said, I was playing Lord of the Rings Online, and I'm over leveled, so I can do a bunch of content in earlier areas that's for groups. But now I'm like, yeah, technically I could do this, but if I just whine in chat enough, a level 140 will come and nuke everything, so I don't have to painstakingly fight individual enemies.
Yeah.
Because that's happened. I've searched for on-level people, and no on-level people ever want to do it. So a level 140 will be like, sure, I'll do it, and then they just nuke the boss for me.
Look, as long as you get the reward.
I guess, but I haven't changed any of my equipment because it's all so good. Because I'm doing low-leveled stuff that I missed. Because it's like different areas are the same level. So you finish one area and you're over leveled for the other area.
Yeah. I remember that in WoW. With the idea being you hit those areas with different characters, but that means grinding up characters.
Yeah, I'm sure shit not doing that.
God.
Like they just put in a level 20 to 30 area, Yondershire, and I went and did that with like a level 50 character. So I'm just nuking all these enemies that are tough for hobbits. And I play a hobbit.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
I play a hobbit primarily so I started in the Shire and did all that content first.
Mm-hmm. It's still astonishing that that is still very much an active MMO. Like,
it's not only active, it's getting new content. Like I said, it literally just got new content.
Yeah. And
its parent company just got, I think, bought out, and they poured a bunch of more money into it.
It's like it managed to go toe to toe with World of Warcraft. While it didn't win, it lived, and that's not common.
More than that, it has a better reputation than World of Warcraft currently.
I mean, okay, that isn't hard. World of Warcraft's reputation currently is so bad that, given Blizzard Activision, given Bobby Kotick, whatever his name is, given every scandal that's come out, given China and its relationship to Blizzard and what Blizzard's been doing over there, there's no reputation there left to salvage. And the game itself, by all accounts, is just gone completely downhill too. The only thing that's left is the art direction. So
yeah, it's literally taking so long that I'm in my inventory going, what do I want to do? Do I want? No, I can't do that. Unlocked all that. Do I want to do that?
Yeah, you're just passing time.
Oh no, there he goes.
Yeah.
There he goes.
Speaking of annoying short things, I started playing South Park: The Stick of Truth recently.
It is somehow a good game, and
Yeah,
I
it
say that as
is.
someone who does not like South Park.
Yeah, same here. I have no interest in
I
watching
mean,
South
why
Park. I
why
don't after.
why you don't like South Park is probably pretty obvious.
I mean, I don't. Have I talked to you about my opinions about South Park? Because they're more. Because
No, but you're Jewish and Cartman.
no, the thing about South Park is that ultimately, I've actually read like. I mean, honestly, there are a lot of Jewish fans of South Park, but like at the end of the day, the thing about South Park is that, and the creators have talked about this. They have a thesis, and that thesis is that they are very strongly pro-tolerance and very strongly like anti-conservative, but they very much disapprove of the concept of political correctness and the concept of like and the idea of portraying things in the best way possible. And their idea is if you look at how the characters interact, people will make fun of each other ruthlessly and also accept each other. Like there's the character of Timmy who only says his name, and he's heavily implied to be he's made fun of for being he has some kind of severe intellectual disability, and he always hangs out with everyone, and he's always showing up and invited to every event. He's always around, and even though people make fun of him, people are never forcing him out or preventing him from doing things. And while I can see what they're getting at the end of the day, all of that philosophy disappears the moment Cartman says something funny and racist. It doesn't matter how complicated or how sophisticated their ideas are. They manage to hide it behind offensive humor, and that is all people will ever see and ever are going to focus on. So any good that they try to do for the world is just going to get swallowed up in people imitating the parts that stand out the most, and those are the offensive parts, because that's how South Park humor works.
Yeah, accidentally aggroed a bunch.
Well, yeah. Just looking at these, like, that's it's weird.
But
Reading about.
I'm just not a fan of South Park because I don't really find it funny anymore.
Yeah,
The early episodes, yes, but after a certain point, Cartman stops being funny. Like
Yeah.
in the early episode, when he's just like a prick and he's still a child, it's funny. But when he has given Kyle AIDS and sicked Cthulhu on hippies and fucking murdered a kid's parents and ground them up, like there's a point where that character no longer becomes funny. It becomes, why is this character not in prison?
Yeah. It just gets gross. Yeah, and the thing about the Stick of Truth is that it takes a very light touch to its own source material. It's you can play it without ever having watched South Park and it still works. And
At the same time, it has a lot of South Park deep cuts.
Oh yeah, it's chock full of them. But most of them either don't detract from the experience or are the good kind of reference, and that they're funny in their own right, just enhanced if you know what they're talking about. And I actually bought the sequel, and the sequel is kind of mediocre.
Yeah, that is the unfortunate part, is that the first game is really, really good, and the sequel's good, but in comparison is mediocre.
And it is mediocre because it leans into South Park. It's more closely tied into South Park, and it stops standing on its own, and it starts sort of getting ground down to the gross, massive continuity that South Park is. So, yeah, I was going to say actually about embalming, about burial practices, because we are in ancient Egypt, sort of.
So go ahead. Only part I know is they stuck a hook in and ripped out the brain.
That is a myth, actually.
Oh, I did not know that.
That is, I mean, yelled at is a very strong term, but I've seen actual Egyptologists, cite that as one of the myths that they hate, that everyone knows. And it's I don't actually know what they did to the brain per se, but I think they just left it in. They didn't assign any particular importance to it, but while a lot of the embalming process was like sanctified, ultimately they were chemically treating bodies to last as long as possible. Like, as long as it didn't, and they removed organs that would either interfere with the process or were like just having them not around would be easier on things. And they would it was a big thing. They would bury their they would very strongly chemically treat their dead and then bury them on the west, because the west was the direction of death. Most ancient Egyptian cities and major settlements were built on the East Bank. People did farm the West Bank, but it was not a place that people liked to stay because it was strongly associated with, like let me put it this way. The way I've heard it, the way it's been said to me is that ancient Egyptians, people talk about ancient Egyptians as if they were obsessed with death. And it's a lot more like they saw the afterlife as just another life stage, not that much different from getting married or moving out, say, because they didn't believe in like their afterlife was pretty wild, but they believed that you would be actually living there. It was not a perfect afterlife, where it was not a paradise or a punishment per se. Your situation determined where you ended up, or if you were sinful enough, you just got obliterated at the gates, pretty much. But like once you were going there, you would be doing the same stuff you did in life. You would be farming, you would be eating, you would be living with your family. And they prepared for the transition to that in the same way that you would plan for your next a stage of life. It's just the biggest one, bigger than any other life change. So they were really afraid of oblivion. They were afraid of complete destruction, and they were desperate to avoid that, because they didn't believe. To them, it's like what we think of as an afterlife, what we think of as like the time after death. It's closer to their idea of what happens if a soul is destroyed as it's being weighed for what they did in life. So they were terrified of that. They were very interested in preventing their souls from being obliterated as sinners, so to speak. It's complicated, but they were just you can't really say they were obsessed with death, because that was a tiny part of what they saw as a much larger process. It was just preparations for a big move, almost. So, and that meant they were preparing the body, because they believed that you would basically be taking the body with you into the afterlife. And it would be like, I don't think they really believed that you would have the same body here as there, per se, but there was like a symbolic connection. So if you had stuff in your tomb, you would be taking a version of that stuff with you, even though the actual physical objects were still there. Which is why people would put big murals on the insides of tombs, because they'd have the real stuff in the afterlife, or they'd put ceremonial examples of like food or something. They'd bring food and wine, say. And even that would mean that they would be able to eat lots of food and lots of wine over there, even though the physical stuff would still be in this world, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So I'm looking at, that's where the whole mummification process comes from. Mummification is supposed to preserve the body as well as possible to ease that transition, to make sure that your body is whole as you get to the other side, and as opposed to just letting it rot, say, which would not be good for you once you got there. And treating the dead badly was just a really awful. Was one of the most disrespectful things you could do to a person, because you were making it. You were basically harming them in the afterlife as much as possible. And the ancient Egyptians were famous for trying to erase the names of people, of like dishonored rulers, from history. Because, and we talked about this earlier, your name is considered a part of your soul, and they believed that by disfiguring that part of the soul, that would be carried on into the afterlife, and that would still directly hurt them out there too. Meanwhile, back in back in our world, you would get people like, lots of people would be mummified to various extents, but the huge tombs that we're familiar with, the pyramids, were only built during one part of the Old Kingdom, really, and otherwise it was a mixture of like graves carved into cliffs, or tombs that were built out of like built with mud bricks, and they also got plundered. They all got plundered. That's a constant. It was, people would just, like, originally the pyramids had caps made out of gold, like the top part was gold, and those did not last through the first intermediate period because people stole them to use them. And
It's a little ironic that they held such a taboo against desecrating the dead, yet they're all stealing from corpses.
I mean, when if you're desperate, and it wasn't even a taboo, because there's like a religious, almost, there's something, taboo has like religious significance beyond that. That was just something that they accepted as a fact. It had significance in that desecrating the dead was harming another person, and when people are desperate, sometimes they harm other people. But, and the weird thing is, did you know that I don't think ancient Egypt ever had currency. They did not operate on a monetary economy. When they collected taxes, they collected them in kind, which means they would collect bread, and they would pay people with bread. And we don't know exactly how that worked. There's actually several theories, but we think that like food sort of served as an impromptu currency in most phases of ancient Egypt, where the pharaoh, or when there wasn't a pharaoh around, the central authority would, or even just local authorities, what they call the nomarchs, would gather up all the bread from all the stuff from the harvest, and then take their taxes and redistribute them, and use them as subsidies, use like the food as subsidies for government officials. So, and not just the food, but like also other stuff like raw materials or goods or crafts or whatever. But they also collected labor. They would levy huge numbers of people and have them go to the other corner of the empire to go build shit. And that's very common in like pre-modern empires. That's something that shows up a lot in South America, that shows up in China. That's how the Great Wall was built. That's all over the place. But yeah, that's just my rambling on that subject. I'm sure there are plenty of things that you can ask about that, but that's all that comes to mind for me immediately.
Well, that was very interesting, and I'm just sitting here like, mostly I'm just wondering what they did do with the brain, because I remember reading that in a book so many years ago. I had the Horrible Histories books, like I've said, and there was one on the awful Egyptians.
Yeah. I mean,
and I had that one.
Let me put it this way.
I had a bunch of those books.
Let me put it this way. I had a big encyclopedia of medieval history written by PhDs, and it had they cited all their stuff. It's relatively well written for what's basically a big kid's book. and I remember vividly a map of medieval Europe and seeing corn on the cob, like as being depicted as a trade good moving along trade routes. And I know exactly what happened. What happened was corn is just an old term for a staple grain, and they called it Indian corn. And eventually, the name just sort of, like, the terms cereal and grain overtook the concept of corn, and corn just became, like, even in the 1800s in England, there were corn laws, and those were for controlling wheat supplies and bread supplies. But, like, that fell out of favor, and that just became the name of what Americans and most English speakers, I think, call maize. And what happened is they sent some notes off to some artist to draw this, and in the sources, these people talked about corn in the original records, and without thinking, the PhDs put that into their notes and passed it along to the artist, and the artist looked at that and went, "Oh, I know exactly what corn is," and put it on a map, even though it would not be in that part of the world for the better part of 1,000 years. So there are things that are always lost in translation.
If you're looking for more on Egyptian bread, Max Miller from Tasting History YouTube channel has an episode where he makes ancient Egyptian style bread.
I hear it was terrible by modern standards.
Yes, but mostly because of the reason all bread was terrible back then. When you grind it on stone, little grains of stone get in and grind down your teeth, so you get grit in your bread.
Yep. And flour was not very well ground, and the yeast was not as sophisticated as the stuff we work with today. Also, most beer at the time was almost literally liquid bread, and it was almost as gritty and also bad. It took, like, Mesopotamian and as late as the Roman Empire, like in the 300s AD, as Rome almost collapsed during the crisis of the 3rd century, they tried to piece it back together. One of the big emperors at the time, Diocletian, built a series of price fixes, where he tried to stabilize the economy by saying, these are standard prices for all of these different goods. Can't deviate from this, because that's a great way to cause more economic instability. This is what you pay. Naturally, that's not how that worked at all, and it ended up causing more trouble. More trouble than it solved. But we have price lists for different kinds of beer. It's Gallic, or basically what's now French beer, and Egyptian beer and Mesopotamian beer. And the Mesopotamian and Egyptian beer were worth garbage. They were very low priced compared to the Gallic stuff, because they were made in the traditional ways of those regions, which were not particularly sophisticated. But yeah, beer at the time also, and not only was beer at the time not like as well made as it is today, it was also less alcoholic. So, to add to everything,
when did they start adding hops to beer?
I think just Middle Ages. It took them a while, and I will never forgive them for that, because that's why we have IPAs.
I don't drink, so all this is academic to me.
God, do you know why they call them India Pale Ales?
Because they would ship them from England to India, and they made them taste like that, so you couldn't taste the spoilage.
Yeah, India Pale Ales were originally made that way, that hoppy, because it would tasted so bad as a basis you couldn't tell it had gone bad. Oh, Ma'at. This I'm going to want to talk about once.
Brothers and sisters knowingly gave up our mortal lives.
Knowingly? One might also say naively.
I must ask Father to move the two of you away from each other.
gave up our mortal lives to maintain this principle for all of eternity. Just as Artan's disciples cast themselves into the arms of total chaos, bathed in his black filth. In their exhaustion, have my siblings faltered?
I swear, if I could actually move over there, I would...
Stare me into submission? Why don't you give it a shot? See how it works out for you.
Oh, gods. As the two of you waste time and energy on quarreling, the oasis is poisoned by creatures not seen since the Red Nights.
The Red Nights ended, brother. The oasis will dry out again. We trust all will face judgment in time.
What a pot of shit! Did you not hear what he said? There is no time!
Did the High Priest of our moon raise you a man?
Our father actually has a name. You know, being a stone statue really suits you.
Iceburn, I presume. Okay, so Ma'at. We only have so much.
It says pick up her scales. They're over here. So I was
Yeah,
just
we have enough time.
like, where the fuck do I pick these up?
Quick access inventory updated.
So, okay. Ancient Egypt's concept of good and evil was different than ours. And because we live in a society. We live in a society where good and evil is usually, for good or evil, is defined by Christian norms, effectively. And or either that or it's in reaction to Christian norms. And that's very strongly based on personal morality, on like the concept of individual sin and of,
I
an
notice
individual's
I notice you say Christian morality is. I don't want this to sound offensive. Is that different from Jewish morality?
Extremely. And it's one of those things that it looks similar on the surface and is actually very different, because Jewish morality is based on the community. Jewish morality is like in Judaism, like what you think it is not like, we don't have the same concept of a sin. We have what's called a mitzvah, which literally means commandments, but it's focused on action. And we are much more concerned with what people do than with what people think. And the concept, like, there's a lot of, I get the impression that there's no finer way to put this. There's basically thought crime in a religious sense in Christianity, where there are
in some veins of Christianity, there is very much a thought crime sort of concept.
and that's something
I don't know if it's intrinsic to the entirety of the religion. I was raised vaguely Christian. Like, we went to church, but none of that shit stuck on me.
That's something that Paul talks about a lot. It's like, not all Christians, hashtag not all Christians, but not all Christians have to or do follow those concepts. But it is something, the idea that thought is, you can be sinful by thinking badly, is something that is not really Jewish. It is something that dates back to that first generation of Christian theologians, all the way back. Mostly around Paul, but like the early church fathers too. And that's something that's alien to Judaism as well, because Judaism is very
something that's alien to me. So, I mean,
but the thing about ancient Egyptian morality is that ancient Egyptian morality was social in the way even Judaism isn't, because like she mentioned Ma'at, and Ma'at basically means balance. But more than that, it means cosmic order. It's the idea that there is a right way for the world to be. And the closer things are to that right way, the better things are. As long as things are in balance, that balance naturally creates justice. The two are, like, that naturally creates happiness in the people who follow it. There's no, like, it isn't as important what a mortal does as, like, that, as it's less important what a mortal does than it is what the people around them do, if that makes sense. Like, and how they affect the behavior of the people around them. And when people are judged after they die and pass into the afterlife, they are judged based on, like, Ma'at is strongly associated with birds. It was a literal deity, and I think she was usually portrayed with, like, bird wings, but they weighed your heart next to a feather, and because that was a symbol of cosmic order. And if your heart was heavier than the feather, you'd die. You would, or rather, you'd be obliterated or tortured forever, depending on who you ask.
You were eaten by that one weird crocodile beast.
Yep, and so like
That
ancient
seems a system built to ensure societal stability.
I mean, ancient Egypt is a society that lasted for 3,000 years in a coherent manner. Nobody does that. Like, even places like China and India which have similarly long histories, have not remained stable in the same way by any means. Their languages.
Oh God, no! China collapses every 200 years.
I mean, yeah, China's famous for that, and India barely ever unifies. But like,
well, that's because it's the size of a small continent. I mean,
so is
everybody's
China.
like, the whole concept of India is and I know this is going to piss people off, is an invention of the English.
Yeah, let's not get into that. Is a complicated question. Let's not get too far into that one. But like, if we're talking about vague culture, if we're talking about cultures, like Chinese culture is very, very old. Indian culture is very, very old. But they didn't.
Oh
have
yes,
the
as
same
a cultural grouping, yeah.
Yeah, but they did not. They have not had the same level of continuity that ancient Egypt did. It took Christianity to break that, and as Christianity sort of like changed up the Egyptian social order, then the Muslims came and they interrupted it further and took over. And the Christians who were at that point dominant, and like I talked about, the Copts, they're still around, they're still Christian, they have their own pope in Alexandria, they were basically forced into a minority and separated from the bulk of society over time. And that was what it took to finally break classical Egyptian culture, even though modern Egypt is very much the heir of ancient Egypt. Like, they still preserve big chunks of what once was in their culture. It just doesn't have the same level of continuity that, ancient Egypt did. So, and I'm sure there are Egyptians out there who would just yell my ear off for saying that, but,
I mean, speaking of Max Miller's Tasting History, one of the comments I noticed under the Egyptian bread recipe is an Egyptian person saying, "This is the same way my mother makes bread."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like, Egyptians are still Egyptians, even after thousands of years, even after massive cultural drift. Like, and I've talked about the necropolis in Cairo, which is still which is, even through all the religious filtering, it's very recognizably ancient Egyptian in its heritage. But like, there is a bigger gap between that and like between modern Egypt and ancient Egypt than between, say, modern India and in like well, I don't know. Let me put it this way: like Vedic India, the ancient India that the oldest records and legends we have is very, very different from modern India, and the China of the Zhou dynasty is very different from modern China. They're both recognizable. You can definitely see where those legacies are. They never went anywhere. You can still see there. You could look at the two, and you could see and quite likely even hear the similarities between them. But they're not the same thing. And ancient Egypt, the language did change over time, but it changed much more slowly than most. Like, the linguistic changes in ancient Egypt were very slow, and you had phases of ancient Egyptian that would take where a phase would last 1,000 years, and that's not common for languages. Languages don't stick around and stay stable for that long. So yeah, ancient Egypt was very old and very stable, and in large part because it was the core of Egyptian morality was social stability. And as
Well,
opposed to
now we're gonna hear the priest talk about this daughter, and you'll be noticing that he's asking them to sing. Is that like their song keeps Aten imprisoned? Is that a Egyptian magic thing, or
Father.
ancient Egyptian magic is extremely strongly focused on words. I can't say if it's focused on song, but there's a lot of the idea of words having power. Like I talked about the Tetragrammaton, and they may have ancient Judaism may have borrowed that and similar concepts from ancient Egypt, but not song. I don't know anything about I know they had music, but I don't know any specifics about how that worked. And I know that we've lost.
Okay, we've got about 15 seconds left. So next time we will be doing, unfortunately, another investigation mission.
God save us, everyone.
I'm sorry. Good night, everybody.